So as we've been talking, we're kicked off a new sermon series today called God Questions. So here's the idea. You know, we live in a culture where God is questioned a lot in a lot of different circles. Some questions arise from curiosity, some from doubt, some from disappointment. And having questions as doubt is never a bad thing, unless you walk away from them and never address them. Here's why getting some answers are important, I think. Many of us have grown up with stories of Jesus in the Bible. We read about Noah's Ark and all these animals hanging around, and you know, that was a cute story. And then we read about Jesus' miracles and all these awesome things that occurred, taming nature, and we're thinking, wow, maybe he really is the Son of God. And then someone challenges our faith. And someone that maybe we trust all of a sudden tries to convince us that none of that is true. It's just fables and storytelling. And our childlike faith then becomes shaken. And suddenly those questions that we never asked come forward. And if those questions aren't answered, our shaken faith can become a broken faith. Our Christian faith is not something that's just a comforting myth for kids. I mean, it's a bedrock that you and I can use every day of our lives. In fact, the Bible itself invites us to tackle these questions of faith and life. So here's some help we get from the Apostle Paul. He says, people. That's another term for brothers and sisters. He says, people, don't be childish in your thinking. Now do be infants in regard to evil, but be adult in your thinking. So, you know, Paul's a pretty bright guy. He is just saying it's good to be naive about engaging in evil. I don't need to experience murder or have some terrible thing happen or do some terrible thing myself to know they're terrible things. I can be naive about evil. But Paul says I need to be adult in my thinking. In your questions about God, be adult. And so we're going to ask some adult questions about God. I read this last week. There was this MIT professor who stated publicly a while back that her journey to faith, she has become a believing Christian, and her journey to faith began on this principle of how do we learn if we can't ask? We have to be willing and able to ask. And that is what we're going to do in this series. So today, we're going to start by asking maybe the most fundamental question there is about God. Does he exist? Is there a God? But I feel like I have to start with a confession. There is no way I can fully address this question in a sermon. You see, in truth, believing there is a God or believing there is no God are both a matter of faith. I can't prove either one of them. But what I can do is I can begin to give you a few things to think about. And this will take us to our text. In Psalm 19, which Corey read earlier for us, Psalmist David is going to give us some clues about God's existence. Let's briefly review Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. Day after day they pour out speech, and at night they communicate knowledge. And then down in verse 4, their message has gone out to the whole earth, and their words to the ends of the world. In verse 6, the psalmist says, the sun rises from one end of the heavens and circles to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. So here we see the psalmist clearly using creation to help us get a grasp on God. To help us kind of answer that question, does God exist? And I just love this psalm because what it says is creation, which is so accessible, and it's visible to absolutely everyone. everybody. And it's so simple because I don't have to do anything but look around. And I can sense creation. I can sense God. I don't need a PhD in philosophy. I don't need a PhD in religion. I just can look up. And I can see God. You know, there's an illustration from a book titled 5 Proofs of the Existence of God. And I'm going to share it with you. It's pretty short. It's called the Aristotelian Proof. Now that's a term for you. And it goes like this. Let's see if you can track this. The occurrence of any change C presupposes something or substance S which changes. Now the existence of S at any given moment itself presupposes the concurrent actualization of S's potential of existence. Do I need to go any further? No. You know, the interesting thing about this is the logic is not only true, it is actually a pretty good argument. If you could ever work your way through it. I had the same response you did. What in the world is this talking about? Even after I studied it a little bit. Which is why I love the psalmist David and what he does in Psalm 19. Not only is what he says brilliant, it is so simple. And I want to take just a little closer look at Psalm 19 and see if you don't agree with me. The very first clue to God's existence is the beauty of creation. Let's look again at the beginning of Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse proclaims the work of his hand. The psalmist is just simply saying, as he looks up into the sky, the beauty of all of this is a clue that God exists, people. So listen up. Those are the words of the psalmist David. That's what he wanted to say. And if you've ever looked at a sunrise or a sunset and you've been overwhelmed by it, which I think we all have, you get what the psalmist is talking about. Part of the problem, I think I concluded this week, part of the problem of unbelief is that it strips beauty of its meaning. Think about this for a few moments. If we're just a random collection of atoms, that means we have nothing. We have no soul, no heart. We're just a random collection of atoms. Beautiful scenery, beautiful music, even a beautiful person who I may really love and think they're beautiful. We're simply attracted to them because in some way they help us become fit for survival. Our ancestors found food at sunrise and sunset, and so they liked them. Beautiful music and people attract us to intimacy, which helps us procreate the next generation. And that's why we like them. The beauty that overwhelms us is not inspiring, and it doesn't really have any meaning except to move us to our basic needs. It's all about survival. Isn't that line of thinking just depressing? That might be the worst things I've ever said. You know, Augustine, an early church author, said this. He noted that our desires as people correspond to objects that satisfy them. You know, for example, what do you think hunger corresponds to? Well, food, of course. What do you think tiredness corresponds to? Well, sleep, of course. How about relational desires? Corresponds to friendship. That brings me to the word beauty. What do you think beauty corresponds to? Don't you think it corresponds to something that's maybe bigger than us? Maybe something that the psalmist was suggesting? You know, an obvious example of the incredible beauty of creation is the Northern Lights. Wouldn't you agree? I found these couple of pictures just to kind of demonstrate how incredibly beautiful these Northern Lights are. I think unbelief just collapses on this discussion of beauty. I'm ready to proclaim that if there is beauty, then we must have a beauty maker. That's the first clue to God's existence, I believe, is the beauty of creation. Now, the second clue of God's existence is the rhythm of creation. The rhythm. Let's continue Psalm 19. So the psalmist here says, God's pitched a tent for the sun, and down in verse 6, it rises from one end of the heavens into the other. So what do you suppose the psalmist is getting at here? He's talking about the order of creation. The sun rises and sets over and over again every day. It's order. The psalmist is citing this as a clue to the existence of God. You know, one of the most famous verses in the Bible is Genesis 1. You'd agree. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what I wanted you to note is what comes next. What does verse 2 say? When God created heavens and the earth, it was formless. It was empty. It was dark and covered. There was no life. It was absolute chaos. There was nothing there. Everything was formless and empty. It wasn't until the days of creation that God put things in order and continues to keep things in order. There's no symptoms of chaos in creation. But you know, it seems that one cannot talk about creation without mentioning the scientific concepts of the second law of thermodynamics and entropy. So I'm going to give you a science lesson here for the next 45 minutes. I'm only kidding, really. Long story short, when energy changes from one form to another, or matter moves from one form to another, disorder, which is often called entropy, in a closed system always increases. Every time. Disorder. Not order, disorder. And yet this psalmist says the universe has this rhythm. This rhythm, by definition, is not random. It cannot be chaos. And if that is the case, then we need to just ask ourselves, who ordered all of this? The universe is certainly ordered. It is not chaotic. But here's another interesting quote from a somewhat famous scientist. This came from Isaac Newton. The most elegant system of our universe could not have risen without design of God. So the first quote we discussed was the fact that if there is beauty, we must have a beauty maker. Then we looked at this ordered rhythm of creation. Finally, I love how honest the psalmist was by including the tension of creation that's shown in this psalm, which is the third clue, I think, to the existence of God. The psalmist shows us that what we see can clue us in on the fact that there is a God, but it cannot tell us who God is. There's still a mystery about that. If all we had was creation, we'd still not know who God is. We would know He exists, but we don't know who He is. So the psalmist continued in verses 2 and 3 here. And so here's some real immediate tension in this psalm. The heavens pour out speech. The night communicates knowledge. And then in verse 3, there's no speech, no words. The voice is not heard. What in the world is the psalmist getting at here? So which one is it? Well, both really. And here's the point. We can learn about the existence of God from creation. But you cannot learn about the character of God from creation. And so the psalmist went on with verses 7 and 8. And in verses 7 and 8, the psalmist says, the instruction of the Lord is perfect. The testimony, the precepts, the command of the Lord. He's talking about what? He's talking about the Bible. He's talking about God's Word. It's a tire switch. He finally takes his eyes off of the sky, and he puts them in the book. The Bible gives him the detail of who God is by detailing the attributes of God. You know, in verses 1 through 6, the psalmist refers to God with a word that is a generic word that means divinity. Now in verses 7 and 8, he's changed the language to the Lord. What does the Lord mean in Hebrew? It means Yahweh. That's the personal name of God. If I want to know of God, I look into the sky. If I want to know God, I look into the Bible. My invitation to you is to keep looking up and looking in. As you ask yourself, where did all of this come from? And here's what you're going to find in the book. We will not only learn that God exists, but more importantly, we learn that God really loves you. And as important, God is not just a person of theoretical solutions to the puzzles of creation, but he offers us practical help for things like worry and heartache and love and guilt and anger. It's just not that God created you. It's that he's interested in you. You are a child of his. And the wonder of it all, have you ever imagined what a baby is thinking when it comes into the world through that miracle of birth? Don't you wish you could remember that? Jesus not only cares about his creation, but he really cares about us as his creation. The cross is not only a clue to God's existence, it's a clue to God's character. And that realization is not just something that we should believe, it's actually something that we desperately need. One final thing. Here's a picture that some students at Concordia Church in San Antonio drew. So when you see this crosswalk, you form a premise based on what your eyes are telling you. So what would the premise be? I better not drive across that crosswalk because I'm going to damage my car, right? But in reality, it's paint on a crosswalk. There's no beams there at all. It's an amazing picture, isn't it? But the point is, if your premise is wrong, you must ask the questions, you must understand the truth, and you must change that premise if you intend to stay on God's path for your life instead of turning to some godless alternative if you have a wrong premise. You do not have to ever continue living under the umbrella of false premises, false teachings, misunderstandings. Seek the truth always. Ask the questions. And I can tell you with all my heart, mind, and soul that God exists. It helps in my conversations when I can frame my beliefs around the clues, like the beauty of creation, the rhythm of creation, the tensions within creation. So today, may God bless all of your efforts to continue to understand and believe and experience faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Amen.